Hello, everyone. This is Andrew Ordover at Catapult Learning. And sorry we were a couple minutes late getting started with this. We had a few technical glitches. So we will go ahead and get started. And I'm here with John Fergus, who's sort of co-host. You can see his ear.
Yes, hello.
There's the rest.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry we're having to share.
Can you be here? All right.
Your microphone's on here.
So good. And the questions. Well, you were going to start with some questions, right? So
Sure.
Do that.
Sure. So just to get started, why don't we, if you could, give a little introduction of what the genesis of the ebook, where the ideas come from, and what prompted you to put it all together.
Sure. Well, the ebook Teaching for the Stretch that we just made available started out as some blog posts we did for Catapult. And the genesis of those was my teaching experience and my experience watching teachers in the field and a number of different places, including here, and just seeing some of the challenges that teachers have trying to get kids to get beyond kind of surface level definitional kind of understanding of things, from very, very narrow, and I call it in the ebook being on the double yellow line, as though you're a kid who's sitting on the double yellow line of a major road, and as long as you're right there in that middle place, you're safe. You don't get hit on this side or that side. But if you have to take a step off in either direction, you're in big trouble. And a lot of the teaching that happens out there in the world is kind of like that. It's very narrow and definitional. And as long as you ask questions on a test that are exactly the way you taught it, the kids will be fine. But if it comes at them in a different way, they're completely lost. And we've seen lots of experiences with standardized tests where kids seem not to know the content, and it's really just because they're seeing it in a different way.
Okay, great. So there are probably some people that are viewing that have read it or downloaded it, maybe not yet. But now that the ebook is published and it's out there, tell us a little bit about what you mean by the title, Teaching for the Stretch. What is that?
Well, if one of the problems that we have is that we have trouble getting off that very bottom level of comprehension of basic definitions of things, and one of the problems that kids have in assessments and then in life is that they only understand it exactly the way it was taught to them. Then the image I had of teaching for the stretch was treating what we teach kids like it's silly putty, and that you can't just hand it to kids and say, there it is, just look at it. That you need to get your hands on it, you need to stretch it and pull it. And that only by playing with it, the same way a little kid would play with the cardboard box that a Christmas present comes in, only by playing with it do you find out what it is, what it can do, what it's capable of, what its limits are, what its capacities are. And so the idea of teaching for the stretch is teaching to give kids a chance not only to learn what something is, but how it is and why it is and what it can do, to really stretch something and learn those kind of first principles. What is this thing I have? How does it work? What can it do? What happens if I bang it on the floor? What happens if I put it underwater? And those are the kinds of things we all learn. That's the way we learn when we're little kids. And I think there are ways we can apply that to more intellectual, academic things as well.
Great. So what do you think inhibits students most from comprehending classroom material to the fullest extent?
Well, I think it's what I was just mentioning, that if the material is presented very factually in the lecture format, and the most important thing is for a student to take notes on it and be able to repeat it, or use it or identify it in a standardized test, then it's very hard to move kids up to higher levels of post-taxonomy. And one of the stories I've told in some presentations is about reading a story, a Ray Bradbury story to kids when I was a high school teacher. And it's all about two knights who are trying to fight a dragon. And they describe the dragon in great detail, all about its iron-like skin and its one horrible lucky eye, and the fact that it breathes fire, and all this stuff. And they hear the dragon in the distance, and they go racing off, and they attack it, and they're killed. And the next thing you see is in the story is two men on a train, and they're horrified by what they saw. And one of the men says, "Don't go back and look. It happens every night. They always disappear." And then the train goes roaring off into the night. And as an adult, you read the story and you think, "Oh, that's really cool because the dragon is a train and the train is a dragon and it's a science fiction kind of thing." But I read it to a group of ninth graders and they had no idea what was going on. They just did not get it. I read it to them again. They still didn't get it. We made a chart on the board of all the qualities of the dragon, the way they're described, all the qualities of the train. And they got that it was a metaphor, but it didn't mean anything to them. They had learned what a metaphor is and what a simile is. They knew the definitions, but they didn't understand it. They didn't get it. And I know that if I had given them a multiple choice test and I had put one of the lines from the story in there and said, this is an example of A, personification, B, hyperbole, C, simile, whatever, they would have gotten the right answer. They would have understood the definition, but they didn't understand the story. And that's the differentiation, I think, that's really important is we're teaching for that definitional understanding and we're getting it from the kids. But the minute they're asked to do something more complex with it, and they are being asked to do much more complex things with it on the new generation of tests, that's when they're in trouble.
Okay, so what have been the effects of this misunderstood element of academic learning time?
So, one of the things we talk about in the ebook is Fisher and Berliner back in the 70s came up with an idea of defining student engagement with something they called academic learning time. And we've created our own variation of it to try and get at certain things. And the first piece of it is students need to understand the objective. And the second piece is they need to be able to manipulate the academic content. And the third piece is they need to have success, 75 to 95% of the time on an individual basis. And I think the first and third are fairly straightforward, and they're things we teach teachers all the time. And the second one, they need to actively manipulate the content. I think way too often ends up becoming something like you give them a worksheet, you give them practice sets of questions, and they've done something with the material at home or in class. They do guided practice, they do independent practice, and you think they've learned it. What I think we've misunderstood is I think we haven't really taken that word manipulate to heart. And that's why I had that image of the silly putty, because I think whatever the content is we're teaching them, whether it's a particular skill or some concept, the kids do need to be able to manipulate it. They need to get their hands dirty, literally or figuratively. They need to pull it apart and put it back together, turn it inside out, and see what's inside. And I think if we misunderstand that, then it doesn't matter how many practice problems we give them if they don't move off that definitional thing or simple procedural thing. If it doesn't get the kids to the aha moment where they really understand how a thing works, then they're not going to be capable of transferring that learning to new situations the way they need to.
Okay, and I think we may have some questions coming in. So take a look there.
Well, I see. I can hear and see, but there's an echo, so I can't understand what's being said. I hope we fix that. Let's go down to some actual questions here, and I'll let you guys try and fix the technical stuff. What do you think will be most successful about the strategies in teaching for the stretch? So should I select that or just talk to it?
I think if you go ahead and select that, and
see what happens. There it is. What do you think would be the most successful about the strategies in teaching for the stretch? That's an interesting question from Clarissa. I think it depends what people experiment with and use. I think some of these things can sound really intimidating and scary and don't have to be. I think a lot of times it can be as simple as having some questions ready, some generic questions ready that you can throw at kids. What if kind of questions. So you understand it this way, but what if I turned it inside out? What if I threw this at you? Getting beyond what and when and where to some of the why and how and especially what if. And one of the strategies I've used and I talked about in the ebook, I call changing the givens, where you've got a problem that has a particular shape and structure, and you just pull some detail out and put something else in. That doesn't just change a fact of the question, but it changes some of what's given to them. So here's the way the problem works, but what if I changed something in it? And we talked about in literature, just if you were studying Harry Potter, not that you would, but if you were studying Harry Potter, the first book, and you changed one of the givens in it and said, well, what if Harry had always known he was a wizard from birth? How would that have changed the story? Now, some teachers feel like changing the givens pulls them away from what they're trying to study. But I think the best way to understand the way something is constructed is by reconstructing it or deconstructing it. So if you really dig into, well, how would the story have changed? How would the character have changed? How would all the events have changed if I changed this one little incident? It gives you new respect for that one little incident, and you understand why the author put it there, right there, in that place, not a little bit later, not a little bit earlier. We've done things with talking about grammar and writing, with just changing things like rewrite this paragraph, but you can't use the letter E. So you suddenly forced kids off their comfort zone to stretch a little bit and use words that they would never think of using. Use words in their vocabulary that they just tend not to use day to day. It stretches them and pushes them a little bit to go beyond what they think they know. So I think those can be really successful because they don't require you to change your lesson plans and throw out things and rewrite them. And it doesn't mean you have to get new books. It's just throwing a couple of weird little what-if questions out to the class and changing things up a little bit so that every one question can end up being 5 and just sort of pop around the room like that. I think that answers this question from Kelly as well. The particular approach or strategy outlined that I found most effective. For me, it's the changing the givens kind of thing and making sure that the conversation in the room is really popping around so that it's not just the hunt for the one right definitional answer, but okay, that's true, but what if I change this? And now what if I change that? And what if we looked at it this other way? It helps kids, instead of looking at things head on all the time, they're coming at whatever the thing is you're teaching from a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different angles and seeing it a little bit more three-dimensionally. Which one did you want me to pick? This one here? Let's see. I'm an EAL teacher and I'd like your views on how to develop more interactive techniques for students for conceptual and retaining knowledge. I think the interactive can mean different things in different subject areas. Obviously, in things like science, you want them actually, literally getting their hands on things more. And I think there's a lot of talk about how to do that in things like science, and a lot less in the humanities. In math, we've talked about using manipulatives a lot. But I wonder if we think about how we're using manipulatives in math. We talk about building concrete skills and then moving into the abstract. But I think the manipulatives can really help us understand things at a conceptual level. For example, one of my colleagues here was helping his son with fractions. He had a lot of trouble with fractions. So he got out a whole set of corn tortillas and a knife, and they started cutting up the tortilla. And the act of cutting something up, instead of just having the little plastic blocks, that did something for the kid to be able to see, here's one thing. Now it's in 2 pieces. Now it's in 3 pieces. Now it's in 4 pieces. And to be able to see step by step that the more pieces he had, the smaller each piece had to be, I think helped him get it in a way that the textbook didn't, and even the little plastic blocks didn't. That actually getting his hands on it and cutting it into smaller pieces made that conceptual leap happen for the kid. And I think we know even adults all over the country have a lot of trouble with some of these things where we've learned facts, but the concepts completely escape us. We heard an anecdote in one of our presentations a few weeks ago about A&W restaurants, which years ago decided they were going to compete with a quarter pounder by having a 1/3 pounder. And they did taste tests with it, and people said it tasted better, they liked it better. Before they released it to the public, they got nothing but high marks for it. Then they put it out and marketed it, and the thing bombed. Absolute bomb. Nobody was buying it. And when they started interviewing people, everyone said, well, why would I want a 1/3 pounder if I could have a quarter pounder? 4 is bigger than 3. And this is high school and college educated adults who just missed the whole concept that the 1/3 was going to be bigger than the quarter. So, that's the kind of hands-on thing I think we can do. In English language arts, it's a little bit harder but I think it's more figurative hands. It's pulling stories apart, looking at them differently, putting them together differently, reorganizing the events in a story and saying, well, what happens if I tell it this way? What's better? What's worse? What changes? Why did the author do it just this way? It's sort of getting under the hood and messing around with the engine to see how it works. Let's see what we've got here. How about this one here? How can we help parents acclimate to the changing classroom dynamics and expectations? Our friend Jessica. I think that's a great question. And I think there's a lot that we can, if we're trying to change the culture of the way we have conversation with kids in the classroom, that it's more conversational, more popcorn popping around the room. I think we can share that with parents. And I think some of these questions, just the simple what if kinds of questions, are things that we can share with parents and say, try and ask questions like this. There are some great sets of questions for getting kids to think and speak argumentatively. Not that that's what parents want all the time, but argumentative writing, big push for that in Common Core and other sets of standards. And just getting kids to be able to think through a process of what do you think, why do you think it, why does that matter? To be able to say, I hate this food, right? Why do you hate it? Why does this detail support what you said? To get them not just to state an opinion, but back it up and then connect their reason with the argument. Just going through that thought process with regular things at home can help support the classroom. And looking at things, watching a TV show, watching a movie, and throwing some what-if questions at them to get them to think more about what they've been given and not just dump it in their lap and say, it is what it is, because it always had to be. But to challenge it a little and say, well, what if it was different? What do you learn about it by thinking if it's different? Let's see what we got here. Do these authentic teaching strategies apply to assessment as well? I think they're already applying to assessment. And I think that's part of the challenge for us is the makers of these next generation assessments are trying really hard to figure out ways to assess more authentically with real life kinds of tasks. And real life tasks tend to be a lot more unpredictable and messy. They're not neat and tidy to assess one little thing. And if you look at some of the performance tasks or even the technology enhanced questions that the test makers are starting to put out for Common Core, but they're going to start sneaking into ACT and SAT soon as well, even for the non-Common Core states. They're asking for some high-level thinking with not a lot of guidance. There are essay questions where what we would have been used to before was 5 bullet points saying, do this, then do this, then do this. And now they're just throwing something out like saying, how does the author transform this myth? And you have to figure out, well, what does transform even mean? I have to compare two texts. Suddenly I have to show how one influenced the other. Back in the old No Child Left Behind test days, the compare and contrast was fairly simple. Like, what's different about them, what's the same about them. Now they're asking things like, how does this passage from John Locke in the 1600s affect the way Susan B. Anthony wrote something 200 years later? And the amount of challenge that's packed into that, of just understanding the two things, and then being able to understand why what the second person wrote depended on what the first person was thinking, is incredibly complicated. And I think if we're not engaging kids in some of the pulling things apart and stretching them and turning them inside out to look at the math and look at the literature, there's no way they're going to be prepared for that kind of assessment when they get to it. And I think that obviously that means that has to affect the way we assess formatively and summatively all along the way, and not just go for the factual information. I know it's challenging, and sometimes it's all we can do just to get the factual information. But often the facts, for some people, the facts come after the concepts. There are things I never understood in math, I couldn't do in math, because I didn't get the big idea. I couldn't just build up to the big idea from little facts. I had no idea what the facts meant. And there are things in math that I didn't get until my 40s. I'm kind of embarrassed to say. One of the things I've talked about in presentations is I had to train a new math program to some people. And as I was preparing for it and reading over the thing I had to train, I learned something that I didn't understand in math. They were showing that you can do mental math and find any percentage you want in your head. And I said, well, maybe someone else can, but I'll never be able to do that. And they said, no, you can do 73% of any number in your head. Because after all, you can do 50%, and you could do 10%, and you can do 1%. And what is 73? But 50 plus 10 plus 10 plus 1, 1, 1. And I was so humiliated to have a huge aha moment at age 40 and say, oh, nobody ever helped me. No one ever let me see that numbers can get taken apart and put back together that way. That it wasn't just what it was given to me, and there's an algorithm for solving it, but that there are limitless ways of tearing it down and building it up again. And I never had that kind of confidence and confidence. And I think our assessments, our lessons and our assessments have to get more at testing kids' facility for doing things multiple ways rather than just knowing the definition or knowing the one way they were taught. Let's see if there's other questions here. How about that one? What resources can you recommend to a teacher who's interested in starting to put teaching from a stretch into practice? Some of the things that have inspired me, there's a wonderful book on argumentative writing, and for younger kids, argumentative is thinking and discussion, called Oh Yeah. It's Oh Yeah with a question mark and an exclamation point, I think. And I think if you've got teaching for the stretch, it's in the references list in the back. There's a lovely book called A More Beautiful Question, which is all about questioning in school and in life, and teaching students how to pose more interesting questions, and learning how to pose more interesting questions, more thoughtful and thought-provoking questions as a teacher. And that's by a man named Burke, I don't remember his first name, but I think that's also in my references list. Can't think of a whole lot of others off the top of my head, but obviously there is that last page of the ebook that has all the things that kind of inspired, pushed me to write what I did. So that would be a good place to start, I think. Other questions from other folks, John?
I think that might be it. So if you've exhausted what's in the
I think I've exhausted what's in the chat area. I hope this was fun, interesting. This is a fun new way of doing things on our end. And I hope you'll take a look at the ebook. And if there are ways that we can help you as teachers, stretch yourselves or stretch your colleagues or stretch your kids, let us know how we can come work with you and help you out.
And just a quick message here at the end. There were a few people that maybe had some technical difficulties, but this will appear on our Google Plus page and also our YouTube page as a video that you can watch later. And again, if you haven't already, please download Dr. Ordover's ebook, which you can access here in the event information or from our Plus page, or also our website at catapultlearning.com. Again, thank you for joining us today, and we hope you download the ebook and put it into use.
Thank you, John, and thank all of you for joining us for this. Bye.
Thank you.